as a musician, I think that's the most important thing for all of us. You know, we always have to stay challenged. We always have to be in a situation where our antennas are up.
What a pleasure to have Christian McBride on today's podcast. I'm Jason Heath. This is Contrabass Conversations, and talk about a guest who needs no introduction. Christian just won another Grammy, this time for his big band, Bringin It album, got the Grammy for Best Large Jazz Ensemble. And Christian has so many cool projects going on, from his duo project with Edgar Meyer to an upcoming one with Bootsy Collins. We talk about that. We talk about his Fundamentals of Jazz Bass and Beyond course, which you should definitely check out. James Brown and the influence James Brown had on Christian, and also this poignant story that Christian shared on the podcast, and so many other topics. I just can't wait to dig into this episode. Thank you so much to our sponsors, D'Addario Strings, by the way. Christian plays D'Addario Helicore Strings, and to Upton Bass and A440 Violin Shop. More on them later. And without further ado, here is my conversation with Christian McBride. So you were just in Madison for the Richard Davis workshop a couple of weeks ago, right?
Yes. I had a wonderful time there, and your name came up quite frequently, ironically.
Did it really?
Yeah.
Well, I know you know Dan Shimolinski, I was Dan's teacher in middle school and high school, so it's been really fun.
No kidding.
Yeah, I know. Small world, right?
Yeah, it is a small world.
You know, I got a chance to see you at the ISB convention last summer.
Oh, okay.
Which was a blast, great set, and it was really cool to hear that story about Ben Puglisi's bass that you're playing.
Right.
And you know, I chatted with Larry Grenadier a few months back, and he has like the sister bass to that, I think. That's
what I heard. Yeah. So he has the flat back bass. Then I can't remember what.
Yeah.
Yeah. There was a flat back and there was a round back. I had actually originally picked the flat back, but as they were packing it, it got damaged.
Oh no!
They put a hole in the side of the bass as they were packing it up. So I said, "Look, I'm running out of time, so I got to go to the gig." So I took the round back, and I just wound up keeping it.
Were you in Australia for that gig? Is that how that bass came on your radar? Okay.
Yep.
What is it? And so I think it's cool that both you and Larry have those similar basses. And I was actually chatting with Ben about how they're almost the same sound, but a little bit different. Really, the only difference is that flat and round.
Right.
What is it about that bass that made you decide to play it? I'd love to hear the story. Like, what is it about that instrument that really resonates with you?
Well, you know, when you touch an instrument, the feel comes first, you know. Something about the way the instrument just felt in my hands, you know, and how all of the notes seemed to project evenly from bottom to top. And, you know, I was told before I went to Australia, the promoter there said, don't even bring your bass. We have one of the greatest bass makers in the world here in Melbourne. He'll put aside a couple of basses for you to check out when you get here. So I was already excited. I had a feeling I was going to find something I liked, but I had no plans on taking anything home with me.
Right.
And so I went to his shop, and I played these two basses, and both of them were really good. I mean, it was quite difficult to figure out which one I liked, you know, for the concert. Ben actually wasn't there. I can't remember his partner's name in the shop, but he was you know, overseeing everything, and he said, you know, Ben left these two basses out for you. He wants you to check these two out. You know, he made these. You know, I said, man, these look amazing. And so, as I said before, I had originally picked the flat back. I mean, the subtleties in sound between both basses. They were very subtle. I mean, like both instruments sounded really great. I think something about I think the round back actually had a sharper, louder sound, like it cut more, you know. Whereas the round back, the flat back seemed to have a deeper sound. It had like a thicker, deeper sound. So it was just a matter of picking, you know. Both basses had great attributes, and they both equally felt great. But like I said, as they were packing it up, there was a little accident, so I went with the round back, and it was cool. I have no issues with that. I'll tell you what, when they shipped it to the U.S., you know, in February, that's Australia's summer.
Yeah.
And so when the instrument got to New York, I think just the climate change really freaked it out. I've had my only issues. It has nothing to do with the playing or the feel, but the seams tend to open up on that bass quite a bit. It's really difficult trying to keep that bass, keep the room humidified enough to keep that bass, stable.
Yeah.
I think I've finally figured it out. I got this industrial size humidifier to put in our living room, and it seems to be working.
Okay. Well, because the climate and around where Ben's shop is, it's more kind of like it's pretty humid, right, year round.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's a big change. You coming to New York in February.
and it's freezing, and dry and bitter. That the bass just said no.
Yeah. Right. So when I get a chance to chat with someone like you, that's a known figure, I put the word out for questions, from the audience, and unsurprisingly, a lot of questions came in, way too many to dig into. But I thought maybe we could talk a little bit. Something that came up time and time again is just Christian's setup. Like, can you talk a bit about what you like? And I know you talked about that in your course too, like the string height and that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. Can you just talk about some of the specifics of what you like in a setup?
I'm pretty easy, man. As long as the action is, like I said, 0.9 on the G strings. All around on the. I don't like the action too high or too low. Mm-hmm. That's really the only thing that is sort of the main and most deciding factor for me. I'm pretty good with any sort of string. I've been using the Dario, the Helicores, the hybrids for quite some time now. But sometimes if I have to borrow a bass and there's some Spiracores or whatever is on there, I'm fine. As long as I have enough. As long as the action on that bass is not too high or not too low, I can pretty much play on almost anything.
There's that misperception about, or maybe I'd love to hear your thoughts. String height. You got to have high strings to pump out the sound, and I know right off the bat you say in one of those videos that's not the case. Why do people have that perception? Did that come from an earlier era, or why do bass players do that?
Yes, I don't quite know where that. Well, yeah, I do know where that came from. That whole way of thinking started to come around again in the late '80s when there was this sort of Renaissance period in jazz. The sort of resurgence of straight ahead jazz with the Marcellus brothers and the whole anti-amp era. Mm-hmm. And while the sound of an unamplified acoustic bass, just with a microphone instead of with transducers and pickups and amps, yes, I do believe that if you're not careful, you can really take away from the beautiful natural sound of the instrument. But at the same time, if you unplug the amp, put a microphone in front of it instead, but you have your strings way high and you're really sort of gorillaing the instrument, that doesn't sound good either. But I think there was this sort of unspoken, there was this ridiculous man code that went with that way of thinking. You know, like you got to have your strings up really high and play real hard because, you know, that's how real men played in the 40s and 50s. Now, the irony of the stupid irony of that was that a lot of that talk was coming from non-bass players. If you were to talk to Mill Hinton or Ray Brown or Al McKibben or Bob Crashaw or Ron Carter, they all looked at us like, "What are you doing? Why are you guys playing so hard?" You know. But you know, there was sort of this movement. And its leader was telling everybody, you got to play with the strings real high, and there were a lot of bass players from that time who never really quite got that out of their head, you know. And when I think of the greatest sounds ever out of an acoustic bass when it comes to jazz, particularly Ray Brown. You listen to Ray Brown in the 60s, you listen to Paul Chambers in the 60s, Ron Carter in the 60s. You could just tell, if you listen closely, you can tell their strings weren't that high. I mean, they were high enough that they were able to get some resistance, so they had to play, but you could tell that they weren't struggling, you know? Yeah. So I never quite understood where that whole, you got to really, put gut strings on the bass, raise the strings really high, have the microphone way out, 2 feet out in front of the bass. And, I remember Ray Brown coming to some gig I did, and Ray was like, "Man, what are you young boys doing, man? What's wrong with y'all? We played like that in the 40s because we had to. You guys don't have to do that anymore. So why are you doing it?" I was like, "That's a good question, Mr. Brown. I don't know."
Well, another couple of things. It's like you got this one video, like an excerpt from your course, and folks should definitely check out your course. It's awesome. But you also talk about, I don't know if you called it chicken wing or like kind of flapping the right arm when you're plucking, and then also like anchoring the thumb. And I love the way you describe just that, and in terms of right hand technique. Can you just talk a little bit about those aspects of right hand technique for you?
Well, there's a couple of things that I guess molded my right hand technique. One was being first an electric bass player, and so I was used to always having my thumb mounted on the pickup. Came from watching a lot of R&B and funk bass players. Their thumb was always mounted on the pickup. So when I started playing the acoustic bass, I just kind of automatically transferred that technique to the acoustic bass, just kind of mounting my thumb, and it seemed to be pretty logical. Yeah. You can't really concentrate on getting a good sound out of the instrument if you got your entire limb moving too much, Right. And then, Ron Carter was my first bass hero, the first acoustic bass hero. And watching Ron Carter play, I mean, he's the perfect specimen of a bass player. It's like all his technique seems to be perfect. He's never, there's never any waste of motion, Yeah. And so I tried to adapt that when I first started playing the acoustic bass. I noticed Ron would, Ron's right hand wouldn't be still, but it looked like he was putting enough energy into the instrument to generate some sound, but he wasn't killing himself. Mm-hmm. As opposed to some other bass players who I was seeing at that time, who didn't seem to be putting in any effort at all, because we're talking the 80s, so I think there were a lot of players sort of like the low action, high volume on the amplifier kind of thing. A lot of the a lot of the sound was being generated by their pickup setup, you know, the amplifier. I didn't hear a lot of bass players talking about projecting sound from the instrument itself, you know.
Right.
Whereas with Ron Carter, just something seemed to me to be like, okay, well, my guess is that if you unplug his amp, he'll still get a good sound.
Right.
As opposed to a lot of other jazz bass players that I was listening to at that time. I could tell if you unplug the amp, you would not hear them, you know. So Ron's right-hand technique, you know, like I said, which moves a lot but not crazy. But when I saw Ray Brown play live for the first time, that just, oh man, it was like an epiphany. It was just like, oh, I'm home. This is how the bass is supposed to be played. You know, this is it. You know, everything about him, his sound, his technique, his pure joy of playing, you know, that's where I wanted to be. I just wanted to hang around Ray Brown like a puppy, which I did anytime he was in New York.
How old were you at that point?
18.
Okay. So were you still considering yourself mostly an electric bass player or mostly an upright player, or where were you in that journey?
Well, by the time I saw Ray Brown, I was already working around New York.
Yeah.
So I was very much an acoustic bass player by that time.
This episode is brought to you by the A440 Violin Shop. It's located just down the street from Wrigley Field in beautiful Chicago on the north side, just off the Brown line. I have been going there my entire adult life, and they have been fantastic, both for repairs. I've had cracks repaired. I've had seams glued. I've had all sorts of students go to A440 to get instruments, to get bows. They're available with a smile, do wonderful work, and definitely check them out if you are in the Midwest. A440violinshop.com, and thanks for sponsoring the podcast. This episode is brought to you by Upton Bass, and have you checked out this new travel bass from Upton? Oh my goodness, what a cool looking design. What a great sounding bass. It's just totally remarkable. And the way that they're launching this product, it's just so perfectly Upton. It's bold, it's innovative. You got to check out these videos of Gary Upton unfolding, I don't even know how you describe it, putting together, I guess, this travel bass. It takes almost no time. It is in a Samsonite piece of luggage. I kid you not. It is just a suitcase. It is literally a suitcase bass, but it comes together and it's a real bass. It's a nice sounding bass. It's so cool. Just another example of the way in which Upton is innovating and blazing new trails for the bass community. So thank you for what you do, Upton, and thank you so much for sponsoring the podcast. How did you see somebody like Ray Brown, and like how did you, like, going forward, next days, weeks after that, what changed in your playing? You see somebody like that, and I mean, what a phenomenal player, phenomenal figure. Did you start to approach the bass differently at all?
There seemed to be such logic with the way he played. You know, I would notice that when when I would get together with my fellow bass players and we would analyze Ron Carter bass lines, I think a lot of it was us. We would try to make it more difficult than it actually was. Okay. You know, look how he superimposes this and he uses this alternate harmony against. And once I started really studying Ray Brown's bass lines, there was a little extra. There was an extra element of soul and you know, this kind of groove thing that you just couldn't transcribe on paper. You know, like the feel, the pulse of Ray Brown's bass lines, the energy, that propulsion, that was impossible to write down. So me coming from primarily R&B and soul and funk background, hearing Ray Brown play straight ahead jazz, I somehow felt the same intensity of groove, you know. Not saying I didn't get that with Ron Carter, but it was way more pronounced with Ray Brown. So it was more I felt more akin to that feel, just because it was so powerful and it could that energy could have been transferred to an R&B or funk band. But then when I actually started paying close attention to the notes, I don't know, just something about it just seemed to be so logical, and I got this sense of course, that's how this bass line would build over these chords. Of course, it makes perfect sense. And then, of course, going back to then reanalyze Ron Carter, his lines made even more sense, So yeah, Ray Brown was everything to me, man.
Something that Dan Shimolinski asked me to ask you about is just technical facility. I mean, the way you get around the bass. Is that something that was just natural for you, or did you consciously work on that? And if so, like when did you start to focus on just getting around the bass like you do technique-wise?
I'm not sure I ever focused on that. As I said in my video series, it's all about having ideas. If you don't have any ideas that match with your technique or vice versa, having fast hands really doesn't mean much,
right.
So I think a lot of that came from learning trumpet solos or transcribing saxophone solos or piano solos. And there was, I don't know, there was never a question of how do I play this? I just played it.
Right.
I think a lot of it had to do with, again, coming from playing the electric bass. But when I played the electric bass, I was playing mostly funk. I wasn't really learning how to play fast. I'd try to learn a couple of Jocko things every now and then, but the idea of getting around the instrument quickly was supposed to be a challenge. That just never came across my brain. That's all.
Mm-hmm.
Whatever the idea was, you just go for it, and you do whatever you could to get it out. And learning these saxophone solos or trumpet solos, obviously I wasn't going to learn sometimes like Joe Henderson or Freddie Hubbard, they would play these fast octave and a half arpeggios. That might be pretty hard to do on the acoustic bass, playing in 30-second notes. But I could probably get 16th notes,
right.
I think the idea was more important to me. It's like, I hear they're playing this arpeggio over this chord. So even though I couldn't play it at the same speed that they could play it, at least I was able to understand what their idea was and to be able to play it at whatever speed I could and still make it useful, or meaningful during the course of my solo.
Mm-hmm. How about in terms of the bow? I love your arco solos, I always have. And just how has practicing with the bow worked for you? Is that something that you did on a daily basis or do on a daily basis?
Well, first of all, you're kind, because I think you're one of a few in a minority that likes my arco solos, including me, right? I listen to myself often play arco solos. I'm like, oh, God. I'll tell you what I did recently. Andy Riccitti, do you know Andy?
Oh, I know Andy really well, yeah.
Yeah, so he played, when we were at the bass conference, he played a Vivaldi sonata, the B-flat Vivaldi sonata, the same one that I played to get into Juilliard. I played that for my Juilliard audition.
Wow.
And so it really made me, I have actually been practicing with my bow again pretty consistently. I don't know how much better I'm getting, but I had some time off. I said, well, I should try to tighten up my bow chops a little bit, and especially standing next to Edgar Meyer doing these duo gigs for the last couple of years. Mm-hmm. That'll make you get in shape.
Sure.
But I found a recording of a recital I did the summer before I went to Juilliard, there was a I can't remember what it was. Was it the Bach Festival? There was some classical music festival going on in Philly, and it was broadcast on the radio. So I played that Vivaldi Sonata, and listening to myself play in the summer of 1989, I almost got really depressed because it was obvious on this recording that I was practicing every day.
Okay.
you could tell, right?
Right.
And so I went, man, almost 30 years later, I was supposed to have gotten better, So I am now deeply inspired to kind of to get back to that. Like I said, playing with Edgar, being at that bass conference, and knowing that there's so many just badass bass players out there, man. I gotta stay on the treadmill, man.
Well, and Edgar, your projects with Edgar, again, several people ask, is there a recording coming out from that? Is there a timetable for anything like that?
Yes. Well, we've been talking about doing a recording for the longest time, but schedules have just made it sort of impossible to do that. But that's definitely on our hit list. There's a few clips of us on YouTube. Mm-hmm. But yeah, we are hoping to put together some original material and go record something soon.
Okay. Did you work with Homer Mensch at Juilliard?
I did.
Okay, can you talk to me about Homer? He's somebody I wish I could have interviewed, but never had the chance. But what were your experiences with him like?
Man, everything about him was just he just had so much wisdom. He was a sage, everything about him was just nurturing, and, he was calm, he was cool, and he always had a soft spot for jazz bass players because Juilliard at that time, when I went, had no jazz program. I went as a classical, classical bass performance major. Right. And I remember when I took my audition at Juilliard and also the Manhattan School of Music, because he was on staff at both schools. I don't know. There was just something about him that you felt comfortable being around him. When I would take my lessons, the first 10 minutes of the lesson would be him asking me what I was practicing on with my jazz stuff.
Nice.
And then eventually we would get into his lessons, which were they were challenging for me because I had never been used to having, like I remember Homer would have he would have an exercise, and he would have very, very specific fingerings he wanted you to use. Sometimes those fingerings weren't the most comfortable, but I think he really just wanted you to understand what his theory and his concepts were for fingerings and techniques. So I would have to read these exercises with the string and the finger. So I would have to read them real slow. That was a lot to read, But I just remember he was a really, really sweet man. And when it got to the point where I didn't think I would go back to Juilliard for my second year because I started working, Homer was probably the first one to say, hey, man, go follow your dream. Juilliard will be here. You go do whatever you need to do, and I'm here to support you. We can still study together anytime you want. So I really missed him. He was such a great man. I remember running into him in the recording studio one time. We were both doing separate sessions, and I was in the hallway getting some coffee or something, and he says, Christian. I said, hey, Mr. Mensch, hey. So I think he seemed to really enjoy seeing one of his students, on a gig, like in a studio, So, he was really, really a great guy.
Well, and he was active in that era during New York. I think he quit the symphony just to do sessions, if I remember hearing that.
Right.
And that was like in the era where, if I'm remembering this right, he actually hired somebody to carry his bass for him. Did you know?
Well, he had back surgery at some point.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, he had back surgery, and I guess there was some sort of complication after the surgery. I actually saved the voicemail he left for me, where he expressed his disappointment that, he couldn't really play anymore because the back surgery had gone bad, and that broke my heart that he couldn't really play anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, everybody, this is Kieran Hanlon from the State University of New York at Fredonia. Coming to you all today to contribute to Jason's blog about D'Addario strings. So I teach here at Fredonia. I play a lot of different kinds of music. I'm a very serious orchestra guy. I play principal bass for the Erie Philharmonic, and I'm a substitute for Detroit, Chautauqua Symphony, Buffalo Philharmonic, Rochester Philharmonic. I do a lot of jazz playing in the region here, and also, of course, solo playing as well for faculty recitals, things like of that nature here at Fredonia. So I really need strings that can do a lot of different things. It's one of my favorite things about the D'Addario helichord orchestras, which is what I play on primarily. So I am a D'Addario artist. I chose to do that for a number of different reasons, which will sort of be outlined here as I go on. So I have two instruments. I have a really big 7/8 bass that I use for classical playing, solo and orchestra. That's a Mike Griffin bass. And that bass has a beautiful dark tone naturally. And so it can take a brighter string, and it actually needs a brighter string to gain clarity, particularly in the low register. So I use the helichord orchestras on it, medium tension. I've tried heavy tension. That was a little bit too much, and I think light would be a little bit too floppy. So the medium is totally great for that. So if you have a big dark bass, the helichord orchestras tend to work out really well. A number of my students here play on very nice Shen instruments, and they tend to enjoy the helichord orchestras as well. Now, one of the things we all need to think about, like I was just saying, I have a big dark bass, I need a brighter string. If you have the inverse situation where you have an instrument that's pretty bright naturally, then it can be nice to try something like a D'Addario Kaplan, which is a little darker and will just kind of add a little bit of warmth if your instrument is naturally pretty bright. So that's my classical setup. On my jazz instrument is a Christopher bass, shop model. It's a 5-string, actually, which is really fun. And at this point, I'm using helichord orchestras on that as well. I did use the pizzicatos for a long time, and I really still enjoy those strings, but I was involved with some more swing era playing, and I was looking for basically not as much sustain, so I could really control the notes for the groove, the kind of walking playing, that sort of old school short note kind of thing. And the pizzicatos were a little bit too much sustain for that. I really did enjoy the strings though, particularly for soloing. So, sometimes if I'm doing something more modern, I will switch back to those guys. Additional things about D'Addario that are great. Customer service, Lyris Hung is the rep, that I deal with, and she's great, easy to get in touch with, always, very quick with getting strings out. The price of the strings, I think, really can't be beaten, It's just a really, really great value. And also, the company's been very supportive of events here at Fredonia, namely Bass Fest, which is our big kind of yearly mini ISB, you might say, we have for a day with, a couple of usually very high-profile guests. And I'm 100% sure that without the company's support, that event would not be happening. So, love the company, love the product, really a big fan. So, if you have any further questions about the strings or the company or whatever, feel free to shoot an email to me. You can find my email on the Fredonia website. Okay, take care.
There's a bassist and Canadian broadcast company host named Pierre Bata, and he listens to your show on Sirius XM, as do so many people. And he wanted me to ask you, as interviewer to interviewer, like, what have you appreciated the most doing your interviews on that show, and what has perhaps been the most challenging?
I think when a musician is being interviewed by another musician, it allows a deeper insight. More vistas open up because that person knows that we're in the exact same business. I can ask questions most non-musician interviewers wouldn't ask.
Yeah.
And I think they feel comfortable with that. Like, there's a famous book written by the late great drummer Arthur Taylor called Notes and Tones, where it's musician to musician interviews, and I think he published that book in like 1970, 71, something like that, 72, early 70s, and he's interviewing people like Miles Davis and Betty Carter and Art Blakey, and you could just tell from the conversation, particularly the one with Miles Davis, because we all know how prickly Miles could get with interviewers asking dumb questions, quote unquote, right. As opposed to coming from a drummer who he knew and played with for many years. It just opens up another thing. So I've enjoyed being able to get my musician friends to open up about very specific musical things, and it keeps me on my toes as well, because playing duets, you have to be more aware and more. There's just more things you have to do. As a bassist with no drummer there, we're already responsible for the harmony and for the rhythm. But working with, I've had a lot of vocalists on the show. I've had Dee Dee Bridgewater, Cyril Aimee, Diane Reeves, Catherine Russell, and then you go to somebody like a Harold Mayburn or a Kenny Barron. It's just it really, really makes you stay on your toes. And as a musician, I think that's the most important thing for all of us. We always have to stay challenged. We always have to be in a situation where our antennas are up. Once you start getting too comfortable and getting into that coasting thing, I think your musicianship skills start to erode. With the kind of schedule that I know you have, daily routines, that's something that people ask about. That's something that I'm interested too. And away from the bass too, do you have any set daily routines you follow, like morning rituals, can be bass related or not bass related? Well, I'm on the road most of the time, right. So it's always been very difficult to figure out what daily routine is when you rarely see your instrument until it's time for the gig. Yeah. My daily routine usually consists of just some warm-ups during sound check. I don't have any particular ones that I work on. Since I've been home, I've gone back to some of my old method books. I took out some of my old ballet books that I was using in both high school and at Juilliard, just to kind of get into a little bit of a groove again. Just kind of keep my sight reading up. Try to keep, like I said before, try to get my bow chops a little sharper. That's a daily thing, but when I'm on the road, it's much more of a challenge to try to figure out what the daily routine is, because usually the daily routine is you wake up, go have breakfast, and you get on the bus, or you go to the airport,
right.
And there goes your morning and your afternoon. So that's what happens on the road, and hopefully you'll have some time for sound check, and you spend an hour or so just warming up. That could be anything, just scales, walking bass line, just something to keep that blood flowing,
Right. So that nothing set in terms of that. Pull the bass out, and whatever feels like the right thing to do is, or what needs work. That's what you dig into. Yep. Okay.
Yep.
I'm picturing you practicing ballet. I love that you've been digging into that. That's fantastic.
Oh man, it's so nice to get back into that again.
Daniel Kimbrough, he's Jerry Douglas's bass player. He asked, I don't know if you have an answer to this, but he asked, how do you color code your calendar?
Yeah, it's pretty challenging. There are some times where I step back and I think, what am I doing?
Yeah.
Why did I say yes to so much stuff? But I mean, I would never complain to any great extent. As long as I could, preserve my sanity and try to do the best work I can for the music community, it's all good. But yeah, there's definitely a lot of color coding on my calendar. I think I'm up to about 9 colors. Because there's the NPR show, mm-hmm. there's the Sirius XM show, mm-hmm. there's New Jersey Performing Arts Center, there's the Jazz Museum in Harlem, there's my wife's organization, Jazz House Kids, the Newport Jazz Festival, and then the bands that I'm touring with. So I have a really good team. I tend to be. It gets to be to the point where if I look at the calendar, it gets a little overwhelming. So, okay. I have either my assistant, Eric, or my manager, Andre, said, look, man, I don't even want to look. What am I doing tomorrow? And they'll give me, right. the 24-hour notice. And I think, okay, good. I can deal with that.
Well, and congratulations with the Grammy win. One of many in a string, but I love the band sounds awesome. And
thank you.
Yeah. Well, and I was listening to that talk you did for the Moth about James Brown, which, like, man, what a just heart-wrenching story, and happy story ultimately. But man, just the moment where, and I'll link to that talk, so people can check it out if they haven't, but like where James, he's like, son, I'm going to have to sue you. And then it gets personal, right? It's like, somebody who's your idol. I mean, you grew up, like went to every performance with your uncle for like years and years. Like, man, talk about a low moment, just like emotionally. That must have been such a devastating thing for you to hear.
Oh yeah, that's a good word for it. In the back of my mind, I can't say I was completely surprised.
Okay. Yeah.
Just because things leading up to that point had gotten a little strange after that Christmas party, and I don't know. I could just feel some sort of rumbling going on underneath, and knowing a lot of his history with his temperament and his sort of I don't know, psychotic is the right word, but these episodes of almost schizophrenic like sort of personality changes.
Yeah.
I wasn't surprised when that happened. It hurt, nevertheless, but I wasn't thoroughly surprised. I wasn't completely taken by surprise. And I also knew that at some point he would probably forget about it, and I guess he did, Yeah. When we did the concert at the Hollywood Bowl, somewhere in between that time on the phone and that Hollywood Bowl gig, I guess I justified my existence. So he seemed to be cool, and then the last couple of years of his life, he was the nicest man to me.
Okay.
But even toward the end of his life, as he's sort of the nice old man who wants to get into heaven, even then I thought, it's still James Brown. He still might turn on you. I recently did a thing with Bootsy Collins, and that's one of the greatest thrills of my life, man, getting to be around another one of my biggest bass heroes. He's as much of a hero to me on electric bass as Ray Brown has been on acoustic. So when we were sitting around telling these James Brown stories, Bootsy said it great. He says, "Oh yeah, man, James Brown will turn on you." Yeah, Mr. Brown will turn on you in a minute. So, yeah, I was glad to know that we had that in common.
Well, I love that. I saw that pop up on Instagram that you were doing something with Bootsy. Can you talk about that project? What you guys did?
I can tell you some of it.
Okay, sure.
Yeah, I can't tell you the whole thing, but I got this call. Say, hey, can you come out to L.A.? I said, when? He said, tomorrow. I said, tomorrow? I said, yeah, man, Bootsy gave the green light. So you're gonna hear about it soon.
Okay.
You're gonna hear about it soon.
That's great. I can't wait. Well, Christian, it's so great to chat with you. I know you're a busy guy. I don't want to eat up too much of your time here. I usually round out with some sort of question of advice for your younger self, something like that. If you could go back and maybe talk to 18-year-old Christian.
Oh man.
any advice you might offer him?
I might have gotten physical with the 18-year-old Christian. I would have grabbed him by the collar and jacked him up against the wall and be like, look, man, develop some discipline.
Really?
You know?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
In terms of bass or just in general?
Everything.
Okay.
Everything. I mean, I realized that not being in college because I only stayed at Juilliard for 1 year, from September of 89 to May of 90, and I was still 17. I didn't turn 18 until the end of May 1990. So between that time, I started playing with Freddie Hubbard, was playing with Benny Golson, was playing with Bobby Watson. I was doing all these gigs, but in between those gigs, I was just being an 18-year-old. Now I guess in retrospect, maybe I wouldn't have grabbed 18-year-old Christian by the collar, but I would have definitely put my finger in his face and said, look, man, I know you're having fun doing all these gigs, but, get a routine going. Stop showing up late for all your gigs. I really would have been, I would have, remember the movie Lean on Me?
Oh, yeah, of course.
With Morgan Freeman?
Yeah.
Yeah, I would have been my own Joe Clark.
Nice.
I would have made myself sing the school song, and get up at 9 in the morning and do some jumping jacks. That's the kind of discipline I would have needed.
Christian, I can't thank you enough. I really appreciate you taking the time to chat, and it just means so much to me.
Hey, man, the pleasure was mine. The pleasure was all mine.
Christian, thank you so much for chatting. Folks, check out ChristianMcBride.com for everything he's up to. Be sure to check out that course and check out that story with Christian on the Moth. I'll make sure that we link up to that in the show notes. It's incredibly heartfelt, and even though James Brown had a reputation for going off like that, just to have your idol telling you the sort of things that James Brown was saying to Christian in that moment, though the story has a happy ending, that is heart-wrenching for sure. I appreciate so much you listening to this episode, and if this is your first time joining us on the podcast, I would love to have you subscribe to the podcast. It's totally free, and you can find the show at contrabassconversations.com. You can hit the subscribe button there and get the show through Apple Podcasts or Stitcher or Spotify or our free app for iOS, Android, and Kindle. And I'd love to hear from you. Reach out. Feedback at contrabassconversations.com will put you in touch with me. So thanks again for listening. Contrabass Conversations is produced by Michael Cooper, Steve Hinchy, Trevor Jones, and Mitch Mooring. Mitch is making beautiful basses in the Dallas area. So if you're looking for an instrument, go to mitchmooring.com. I'm your host, Jason Heath, coming to you from San Francisco, California, and we will see you again soon for more life on the low end of the spectrum.